This is a video tutorial for the Happy Days Santa Sweetie. It's designed to hold a whole tub of chocolates. I'm just going to put the last few in. And as you can see, it holds a whole tub. Ideal for putting on your sideboard or even giving as a present. And this is what you'll need. Fabric for the lining, both self foam interfacing, fabric for the outer, faux fur for the beard, a small piece of felt for the trim, and fabric for the nose. And bow sock for the hat and fabric for the front of the hat. And this is how we make it. We'll start by making the lining. Place your two lining fabrics right sides up so you're looking at the pretty side, and then take one and place it on top. Line up all the edges and add a few clips. I've added some clips and I've remembered to leave my gap sign for turning. And now I'm going to take it over the sewing machine and use 1/4 inch seam allowance, starting at the top, sew down to the bottom and stop. Sew all along the bottom and stop. And along this side we're going to leave our gap a little bit different, but I needed a bigger gap because there's quite a lot to come through. So starting at the bottom, to your gap sign and stop, and then starting again there, right to the top and stop. We won't be sewing in the box corners. I've sewn all the way along this side, all the way along the bottom, and I've remembered to leave my gap this side, so I've just sewn from the end to the gap and started again at the other side of the gap right to the top. I've also pressed open the seams both sides and at the bottom. This is just so it'll make it easier when we box the corners. I'm now going to box the corners, and to box the corners, put your finger in and then line up this bottom seam and this side seam which we've pressed open. Make sure that they line up, and then add a clip in the middle or a pin, whatever you prefer, and I clip that side and one here, so they look like that. And now I'm going to box the other side. So exactly the same. Place your fingers inside and line up the side seam to the bottom seam, exactly the same. And add a couple of, I'm using three clips, but you could use pins if you want to. I'm now going to take it over the sewing machine and use 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew all along the box corner on this side and all along the box corner of this side. Again, 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's our box corners all sewn, both sides. And we'll put that to one side while we work on the outer. We're now working on the hat. I've already put bowsole interfacing on the back, and taking your trim, place your trim right on the edge, line it all up neatly, and then add a few pins. I've added some pins, and now I'm going to take it over the sewing machine and sew fairly close to the edge, sew all along, joining the trim to the hat. I've sewn the trim into place, and now taking your faux fur beard, place it furry side down on top along the edge, and add some clips. I've added some clips, and I'm going to tack fairly close to the edge, ensuring the beard is attached to the hat. Next, take the lining to your hat and place it right sides together on top. Line up all the sides and edges and add a few clips to the curved sides. I've added a few clips to the curved edge, and now I'm going to take it over the sewing machine and, starting right at this end, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew carefully all around the curve to the top and stop, and then back down the other side and stop. We're not sewing along here. I've sewn all the way around the curves, and I've snipped all the way around, and I've also snipped the top, and now I'm going to turn it the right way out through the gap at the bottom. I've turned it the right way out, so I'm looking at the back of the hat, and I'm taking my front piece and bringing it across and placing the hat on top, and ensuring that it's placed in the centre so there's adequate room at the side for our seam allowance, and that it's all equal. And when you're happy with that, add a few clips. I've added 3 clips, and I'm going to take it over the sewing machine, and again using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew all the way across, so I'm joining the hat to the front body. I've sewed all the way across. Now taking your back piece, place it right sides together on top, line up all the sides and add some clips. Make sure before you add your clips that you've done it right sides together, so you're looking at the back. I've added some clips, and now I'm going to sew using a 1/4 inch seam allowance along this side, all the way across the bottom and back up the other side and stop. And once again, I won't be sewing in the box corners. 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've sewn along this side, all along this side, and all the way across the bottom, and I've remembered to leave the box corners clear, and we're going to work on the box corners now, and as we did for the lining, in exactly the same way, although it will be a little bit tougher. Bring this seam and this seam together, line them up, and then add some clips. like I say, it's quite stiff because we're using Bosal, so you will have to take your time and persevere with this. And there's one done. Now do exactly the same for this side. I've boxed both corners, added some clips, and now I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine and use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew all the way along and do the same for the other side. I've sewed along the box corners and now I'm going to turn it the right way out. I've turned the outer the right way out and now I'm going to place it inside the lining, which is still the wrong way out that we made earlier. I've lined up the side seams and the top edges and I've added some clips, and now I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine and use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew all the way around, joining the outer to the lining. I've turned him the right way out, and that's our Santa Sweetie beginning to take shape. I've tucked the lining in and I've sewn up the gap. I've also left a little bit of the lining showing and top stitched just along the back for a nice finish. Now we're working on Santa Sweetie's nose. Take your nose fabric and thread a needle and thread, and using fairly big stitches run a gather stitch all the way around. I've run a gather stitch all the way around, and now take a small piece of wadding, or you could use a cotton wool ball if you've got some, and then slowly gather up, ensuring that your stuffing fits in neatly. And then cast off. I've cast off my stitches and that's your Santa Sweetie nose finished. I've attached Santa Sweetie's nose. I've used my glue gun, but you could sew it on if you prefer, and that's your Santa Sweetie all finished.